spend the time to talk to all the professionals and stuff, because like Joe was saying with Annie, like we just talked to her for pretty much an hour and a half straight, and we got so much out of that. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Even if we didn't crank out as much as like Mr. Kelly would probably want us to do, like we were able to like learn so much.
In the process of writing, one of the most important things you do is write your lead. And just to give you some guidelines, we always used 29 words was the most you wanted to have in a lead. And you need, again, why it's good you have notes, you need to know as you collect your story and as you write your story, you need to know what is the most important thing. And then that's your lead, and then your story is written to accentuate the lead, fill in the information on the lead, and just make sure that what the lead is how you tell your story. Accuracy is probably the most important thing you can do. And it's also one of the hardest things, because while you're doing a story, you're interpreting what you've been told or what you've seen. And sometimes your interpretation is going to be different or even a different understanding than the person that you were talking to, or at whatever event you were covering that you were observing and then writing your story. So it's really important to just focus. When you gather information and you go to put it together with your story, you pick and choose. Well, when you pick and choose, you're making a subjective decision. And when you do that, you can accurately report what somebody said or what you saw, but in the context of how you arranged it in your story, it has a different meaning. Now, that really woke me up the day that I realized I wasn't thinking of context, I was just thinking of putting the information down on paper. So I had to learn, and I think every reporter has to teach themselves how to understand context so that you know how you've put the story together is how it is supposed to be interpreted. You want the reader to become very comfortable with believing you by being able to say, that's the way it happened. Being observant is really very important too. When you go to scenes of accidents or fires, or you go to a meeting, it isn't just sitting there taking notes. You want to bring something else into your story. You want to have color, you want to have emotion, you want your readers to feel what went on. But you don't do that by exaggerating, you do that by translating that story into these words that are so important, so that when your reader finishes the story, they feel as if they're there. Work at understanding what the people you are talking to are saying, and do not be afraid, no matter who they are, to say, whoa, I really don't understand you. Can we talk about that a little more? Because it's your story and you're the one who has to be accurate. This kind of goes to something we've touched on a little bit so far, and it's that you're always on. That's something else as a reporter you kind of learn. If you think, okay, it's the weekend, so I'm taking a break from my grueling week, you're going to miss something, even if you're not working. You always, I did it myself, and I would try to teach other reporters. Your brain is never off when you're a reporter. Even if you're on vacation, there's a little part of your brain that is still observing, thinking about what's going on, paying attention. People would always say, how do you have so many stories to tell? Because they don't have these kind of experiences. Well, the reason was because reporters are always on. Because you'll just see things that other people won't see. And that adds to how you can write your stories, and again, back to the color and the emotion and the accuracy. You just don't shut off.
I'm going to be teaching you guys how to do sound gathering for news, whether that's for a podcast or radio news, or just to throw in with your print story. And we were talking about with the photo teachers that you're all going to be multimedia reporters. We're already all multimedia reporters, so it's not so siloed anymore. Okay, so what I want to do is have someone read this aloud, if you can.
Almost 4 months after promising $1 million of his own money to veterans causes, Donald Trump moved to fulfilled that pledge Monday evening, promising the entire sum to a single charity as he came under intense media scrutiny.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So you can see that there's a ton of facts in this sentence, and it is one sentence. So this is a lead from a David Farrenhold story on the Washington Post. And then this is, I took this from an NPR training thing about how to transition from print to radio. And so they did like a fake NPR version of this lead. And you can see that they've split it into 4 sentences with all of the same facts. And you can see that it's a lot more readable. You can read between sentences. And what we're doing here is really holding the listener's hand through the sentence and through the presentation. So with print, you can read it again, or you may be skimming, and if your eye is caught by a fact that interests you, you'll pause and you'll look at it. That's not how radio works. Radio listeners are distracted, they're probably multitasking, and you can only hear it once if you're listening to it live, and even when you're listening to a podcast, you're probably not doing much rewinding. So it's really important that we move slowly, really make sure every fact sinks in with the listener. And that means that you have to write in a lot more of a simple way, a lot shorter sentences, fewer phrases and thoughts per sentence. And it might sound like we're oversimplifying or dumbing down in a way, but I think that you'll learn that there's a real art to good radio writing, and it can be complex and nuanced and creative and interesting, just like good print writing can, just in kind of a different way. So we're going to talk today about how to write around tape, and sort of what should be stuff that you write with your own words, and what should be stuff that you quote, things that you might paraphrase from a source, or a soundbite that you would take directly, when you're going to use what we would call natural sound or ambient sound, which is sort of the sounds of the environment or sound effects that are going on, and how you'll write those into a story. And use it all to really bring a scene to life. We think of radio as taking listeners to wherever we were reporting. And again, a good print story can do that too. I started out doing this thinking of myself as a writer first. I loved to write for print when I was in college, and it took me a long time to really fall in love with sound, but I really see it as such a cool, creative tool now that it just, something about making people listen to something without being able to see it kind of forces you to engage more and imagine more what you're seeing, and that can actually be a really cool way for listeners to interact with the story.
We also need to talk a little bit today about making sure that you get your facts straight. There's a lot of people out there right now, maybe you've heard it, they say fake news, they don't trust journalists. So that's why it's so important in today's world that we make sure that we get our facts right, that we write down or record things exactly as they are so people see that. And then also to be verified with other sources. So for example, yesterday I was talking to a doctor in Rochester who thinks that every child when they enter kindergarten should be tested genetically to see if they have a predisposition for opiate addiction. Okay? Now, to me, that sounds like a very bizarre thing to be testing a 5-year-old for, right? But at the same time, I was like, well, that's interesting if there are genetic links that we can figure out. So I talked to this doctor, but then I talked to a lot of other people. Not all of them I use as sources in the story, but I talked to a lot of other people about what that person was saying to give it my story balance, to bring it fairness, and to make sure that I'm covering everything. It's great to walk up to someone and say, "Hi, Olivia, what do you think about XYZ?" And then just go on, type it up. But it's much better if you talk to Olivia and you talk to these 3 ladies about the same topic, and maybe you talk to a professor at the University of New Hampshire or an expert on the subject. So right now it's very important that we talk to multiple people about things. We give things balance and fairness, and we're making sure that we always get our facts straight. Now, there are going to be instances, especially since we're human, where we're under pressure and we don't get things exactly right. And that's why there are corrections or clarifications that you can run the next day. But let me tell you this right now. Not nearly as many people read that correction or clarification as they do read the front page where that story was wrong. So it's much, much better to make sure you take your time and not rush and get the facts straight.
Greg Sullivan, I'm a lawyer. I represent media companies. I like to begin talks like this. Sometimes at school you pledge of allegiance, but I want you guys to pledge to the First Amendment, because the First Amendment to me is what makes this country the great country that it is. It's the building block of all of our rights. This is the Constitution of the United States of America. There's only 4 words I care about for today's purposes, and I hope you can all read them. We the people, done. What that means to me is, and you need to know this, we, you, are the government. We the people own the White House, the State House, Town Hall, the police station, and all the information and records contained therein. So when I say right to know, I'm talking about the right to know what our government is up to. Hey, here's something I want you to take with you for the rest of your life, whether you're a journalist in the future or not. If there's a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it's that the government may not shut us up just because some people don't like what we're saying, even if it's 98% of the population doesn't like what we're saying. The Nazis have the right to march in Skokie, Illinois, a heavily area populated with Holocaust survivors and their descendants, Jewish people. That's where the Nazis choose to go have their parades every year, the American Nazi Party. They have that right. Mr. Johnson burned the flag in 1984 in Texas, and he was convicted of a crime, and 5 years later the Supreme Court of the United States overturned that conviction, saying that the government cannot shut him up. And when I'm talking about free speech, speech isn't just the spoken word or the written word. Speech is burning a flag. Speech is wearing a black armband. Speech is taking a knee during the national anthem. Free speech. And by the way, speaking of taking a knee during the national anthem, if the government's not involved, the First Amendment is not involved. Here in New Hampshire, we have a constitution that protects free speech and free press even more vehemently than does the First Amendment. Our rights have to be inviolably preserved. There are different kinds of speech. Political speech, which you're going to deal with today, gets the most First Amendment protection. Religious speech, artistic speech, and as we go down the line to indecent speech gets very little First Amendment protection, and defamatory speech and obscene speech gets 0 First Amendment protection. We can't defame and we can't be obscene, and if you can figure out what obscenity is, you're doing really well, because I've been trying my whole life. I can't figure it out. Hey, I'm out of time, but everything you need to know about these topics you can get online at rcfp.org. That's the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. A tremendous website. It has an outline of the law for all 50 states. You can click on New Hampshire and learn it all.
Okay, everybody, this is a moment we have all been waiting for. We're so fortunate to have both of our congressional candidates in the 1st District with us here today. As many of you know, this is Chris Pappas. This is Eddie Edwards. Yeah, give him a big round of applause.
I'm Chris Pappas, grew up in Manchester. I'm a graduate of Central High School. And actually I became politically aware as someone who was working on the student newspaper at Central High School, our Little Green newspaper. And I got interested because I was at a school and in a system that I didn't think was valued. And we didn't see a lot of resources being put into public education in Manchester at the time where I was going through high school. And with a group of my friends, we got involved in the student newspaper and started writing about it, and started looking at our role in the larger community and the way that we could bring focus and attention to an issue that was impacting us and that would impact future generations. That led me to go down to the local campaign headquarters and start helping out candidates, and it led me as a 22-year-old to run for the state legislature when I came back to New Hampshire after college.
Again, my name is Eddie Edwards, and I am running for Congress in the 1st Congressional District. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Been in New Hampshire for over 30 years. My experience growing up was probably unlike yours. I have to tell you, I was not interested in journalism in high school. I participated in mostly athletics in high school, and but the circumstances by which I grew up kind of shaped my view of life, like all of you. I grew up in a home where there was a lot of domestic violence, a lot of drug use in the community, and I saw those things firsthand. I understand what it's like to have a mother who's subjected to verbal and physical abuse. I understand what it's like to live in a community where there is gun violence. I understand what it's like to live in a community where drugs are used and sold. I have an older brother who's in prison right now, doing 18 to life for murder. And this is why I've been always motivated in life, because I had a grandmother who stepped in and kind of taught me the values of our country. Taught me self-reliance, independence, how to forgive, how to love, how to pray. And I think those things are important, because in America, unlike any other place in the world, you have a chance to always change your life.
We went over actually your websites and looked at them, and there was a whole lot about gun control. So what are the ways that you guys can actually work with gun control and make the students feel safer and protect us from what could be possibly school shootings?
Sure. I think if you look at New Hampshire, we do a pretty good job. We do a pretty good job. The security system getting into the school today was, I thought was really good. And I can tell you as a former law enforcement official, I think what New Hampshire's doing, we should be allowed to continue to do. I'm not supportive of the federal government in Washington, D.C. Coming to the state of New Hampshire and telling New Hampshire what to do. I think we have wonderful lawmakers here in this state.
I think that we can make sure that we have universal background checks so that we're looking at every single sale. You know, you wouldn't just check 3 out of 4 people going through the airport. You screen everyone, and the same should be the case for background checks. I think in addition to that, we need to make sure that we take steps to take very dangerous weapons out of the hands of individuals that would do harm to themselves or others around them.
I wanted to know what we do to make college more accessible to all sorts of students.
Yeah, I think this is an important challenge for New Hampshire because, as I mentioned, we have the highest student debt load of any state in the country. We also provide the least amount of support for our university system. And we're pricing so many young people out of higher education here in our state, sending them off to other states, many of whom never return to become a part of the workforce here. So that's a challenge we've got to face head on. I think at the federal level, there are immediate steps that we can take to help ease the burden of the cost of college. I don't believe that anyone should be taking out a mortgage to get a higher education.
I think one of the most effective ways to lower costs and provide greater accessibility is to provide choice. You see a lot of folks who learn differently and develop differently. And so this is about changing the way folks are educated. Online universities now are increasing. You see Southern New Hampshire University is one of the fastest online growing colleges in the country. So I think it is about providing greater choice.
That's a great question. So the question was, what makes you think you're fit to take on this job? And usually I get the question, why the heck do you want to go to Congress, right? Given the system and how it functions today. But I don't want to believe this is as good as it gets. And I think we have a real clear case history from here in New Hampshire about how we can get things done. You know, as a member of the Executive Council, our state's board of directors, I've worked with governors of both parties and legislators of both parties to make things happen. Worked with Maggie Hassan and Chris Sununu on key priorities for the state. And I think that's where Washington fails, is that politics is a zero-sum game. Both parties are just out to beat one another up, and they're not about results. So I think it's about putting people before politics.
In my life, I haven't had the fortune to ignore certain people. I've had the responsibility of working with everyone to accomplish a goal. And in this country, we have a responsibility if you want to be in leadership. to work with everyone. And my approach, my success in life has been because I've been open to listening to folks, working with folks, and getting through the difficult times. And I think we can do that in Washington if we elect the right people in Washington. The way you change Washington is change the people you send it.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could ask you about, so I read through your website and you said that you would like to overturn Citizens United. How do you plan on doing that?
Yeah, pass a constitutional amendment.
Perfect.
You know, we have a Supreme Court that ruled that corporations are people.
I'm embarrassed because when I was your age, I wasn't like this. So then you have to say to yourself, like, what did I miss out on? But that you guys are getting, so it's really important. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
So at this point, you're going to be creating your stories, which means the folks doing visuals and the folks writing the articles are going to head to the library. The folks doing the radio, the audio stories, are going to go back to the room where you did the earlier session. And just so you all know, to thank the candidates again, I believe this is their first time appearing together after winning their respective elections. So it's really kind of them to share their time with us.
What else did you guys, highlight in your notes that you want?
Like stuff about young people and students, I think would be good.
Yeah, so like the student debt stuff.
Yeah, that's fine. Can you send copies of them so that they can work with them?
Yeah, I also, what?
Two, sorry.
I have I took a personal side or the overall side, and yeah, we're just trying to guess the interest, and we're trying to guess the play of the story.
I think
but both were trying to play to us.
What else did they talk about young people besides gun violence? And then
they both were kind of like, we believe in you.
Yeah.
So that part, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
So why don't you just start with first?
What's your angle?
Melanie, okay. That's the other thing about taking notes. You have to be able to read them.
Okay, so here's what I think I'm gonna do. I think I'm going to start writing my script out now and pull some things from there.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
And
that's usually what I do is I get a sense of what kind of bite I'm gonna want,
exactly.
knowing that it's there somewhere.
Whether forget exactly how the quote ended, or you would need that was
Difficult, trying to make sure that you had exactly what they said so that you could accurately write it down, but also keeping up with every single thing that they said, because there would be, very brief and always saying important things.
So we'll start on this end. What did you write about?
I wrote an event piece, just explaining what was happening, what went on today.
Okay, so did you?
What was a main point that they discussed?
Okay, so did you focus on the event as a whole?
No, I focused on the opioid discussion that they had.
Okay, that was a very crucial conversation. What quotes or what statements caught your attention? And so did you talk at all about their backgrounds?
Yeah, I explained how Edwards had first-hand experience of drug abuse when he was a kid.
Yeah, and then he's experienced on the other side working in law enforcement.
What went well for you today as far as reporting on this, writing your stories, whatever?
Well, having the candidates here was really cool. That was I did this last year too, and having the candidates was just amazing. It was so cool being there, having them here. They were both great people. It was great to talk to them, so that definitely went well.
I think that a lot of the information that was presented to us, we knew, a lot of it we knew before when we took Journalism 1. However, seeing it reiterated by professionals and those sort of reinforced it.
We were able to learn brand new things, but then instead of having to just have them sit in the back of our brains, we were able to implement it right away. So we would get a tip from a professional, and then 10 seconds later, we would be able to do it ourselves, which I think was like a really important skill, because it was like we were taught something and then just sat on it for a while. It was like we were taught it and then immediately could implement it into like a real life situation.
But it was tough in, what do we have, hour and a half maybe? So it was tough you have to first gather all your information, see what you want to cover, like what's your angle and everything, and then trying to write that in probably an hour. It's not very easy.
Well, I remember somebody said, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but someone said like, oh, they just shook hands, and you're like, that would have been such a cool, like they've never like shook hands after, like that was the first time they've ever done that. You did? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay. That is a historic photo.
I did get the picture.
Yeah, there you go. So it's like those things of like, oh my gosh, that would have been like a prime opportunity. Like you don't want to
be ready.
regret that.
Be like ready to go.
So gross.
Like we learned at the very beginning, journalists always have to be on, otherwise have their mind ready, and always have to be like aggressive. So like being, as soon as they walk in the door, being able to be in that mindset.
Spend the time to talk to all the professionals and stuff, because like Joe was saying with Annie, like we just talked to her for pretty much an hour and a half straight, and we got so much out of that. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Even if we didn't crank out as much as like Mr. Kelly probably want us to do, like we were able to like learn so much.